Namaste and welcome everyone. I'm here with Navjeet of Dr. Arjun Pai's Astrology channel. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here with you today as we discuss Jupiter's debilitated transit effect on everyone's ascendant. Namaste, Nav. Good to see you. How are you doing?
Namaste, Kṣaṇāti. Good to see you. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
All is well. There's a lot going on in the stars right now at the same time as this Jupiter debilitation transit is happening. There's also the Saturn and Capricorn transit happening, and they're aligning to the same position. So we have that Saturn Jupiter conjunction aligning along with this, which I'm sure will be involved in. We will discuss at some point in these sessions or future sessions as well, because that conjunction will be lasting a long while. So
Right. And we have a solar eclipse coming tomorrow.
yes, and it's over. My birthday was last Sunday, so it's over my birth nakshatra. So
Okay.
it's been an intense eclipse so far, I have to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very powerful in Jyeshta nakshatra. Shifts in authority and hierarchies and families and new babies being born and older members of the family dying and things like that. Lots of interesting things happen
Right.
as a result of that. But I think before we dive into discussing the debilitated transit on each ascendant, let's do a quick chant to Ganesh and my guru Amma. Om Gananam Tva Ganapatim Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamastravastamam Jaistarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatanaha Srinbanu Tibihi Sida Sadhanam Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakayeshu Sarvada Siddhi Buddhi Shakti Sahita Shriman Mahaganati Pataye Namo Namaha Nirvignam Kuru. Om Twameva Matacha Pitta Twameva Bandhu Cha Saka Twameva Vidya Dravanam Twameva Sarvam Amriteshwarema Twameva Sarvam Amriteshware Mama Twameva Sarvam Amriteshware Namaha. Hari Om Namah Shivaya. Namaste, beloved followers of the planets and stars and lovers of Jyotish, followers of Dr. Pai's and I's channel. It is such an honor to be here with you today. So in our first part of our video series, Nav and I discussed how this debilitated Jupiter and Capricorn transit was going to affect society as a whole and society at large. Now we're going to be looking at how it's going to be affecting each Lagnesh, each ascendant in a different way. And so if you're an Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, whatever kind of Lagnesh you are, you can get a more specific idea of how this transit will be affecting you. So we're going to start with Aries today. So for all you Aries Lagnas that are excited to figure out how this transit is going to affect you, let's take a look. So right here is the chart for the Aries Lagnesh during the Jupiter debilitated transit. And as you can see, Jupiter is a friend to Mars. So for the Aries ascendant, Jupiter is a functionally benefic planet. So generally that bodes well, except for the fact that Jupiter is debilitated. So it also is going to present some challenges. But the fact that it's functionally benefic may help negate some of those challenges in some areas. But you see that the debilitated Jupiter transit here is happening right here in the 10th house for the Aries Lagna. So that transit over the 10th house for the Aries Lagna, while Jupiter is in Capricorn, you'll see Saturn in there and that combination there. It's a great time for expansion and growth in their career. It's a great time to reach our potential. It's a great time for them to grow their wisdom and their knowledge about their field of expertise. The thing about Capricorn, especially when Saturn's also placed there, is you don't get anything without having to work for it. And you don't get anything also without having the knowledge to be able to perform a certain skill. And so one of the things that you see showing up for the Aries Lagna is them kind of, whatever their skill is in their career or their craft, them learning more about it, coming more disciplined about it, coming more structured about it. And that's when you see that career expansion take place. But because Jupiter is debilitated, there is a possibility for the person to have laziness in their career. That means that they are vulnerable to the potential of, having challenges in terms of finding the career that's most fulfilling for them, where they feel that they're being their highest self. Again, Jupiter is that guru planet, so it's going to be striving for that guru energy in the career. But it's going to be difficult for that to manifest in an easy way because of the debilitated state and Saturn being in its natural sign there. So for all of the Aries Lagna during this Jupiter debilitated transit, know that it's going to be hitting your 10th house. And so keep very strong with your career. There's a lot of growth potential there. There's a lot of success. There's even high indications of possibilities for promotions, starting your own businesses, all of these kind of things, starting your own home business, starting your own product line. It's a great time for that, but all of those things require lots of time and lots of hard work. And that's really what I see showing up here for the Aries Lagna during this transit. So I see a lot of success in that area of career, but it comes with that in energy of that debilitated factor. You have to work much harder to get it. But because Saturn is there and in its own sign, and they're going to be conjunct, it's also kind of guaranteed. So if you do the work that's necessary, you will get to that next level or stage in your career. If you don't, you could be lazy. So again, it does kind of push you to wanting to overcome that energy and improve your relationship with Jupiter and be disciplined towards your career. And that's a very remedial measure during this time, and to not be lazy when it comes to our work or career, especially if you're an Aries Lagna during this transit.
Is it also a good time for, if someone has they already have a business, to something like marketing and promoting their existing business?
Yeah, it'll be a really good time for that. The 9th house will be activated. It's a house of fortune. A lot of fortune can get activated there. And it's a huge part about the structure of any kind of career is how we promote it, is how we advertise it, is how we market it. Otherwise, no one knows what we're doing or how we're doing or what kind of service we're providing. So Yes, definitely part of that restructuring is what can I do uh, within this system that is built, the government system, the capitalist system, the government system that you're in, to acquire funds, to acquire money, and to establish security in your career and your finances. So definitely. Definitely. So you think we should move on to Taurus?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So for the Taurus Lagna, as you can see, they have their own thing going on, as the exalted Rahu is transiting their ascendant. So let's first understand that they got that going on before we even start talking about how Jupiter's going to be impacting them. But it's very significant because Jupiter's going into its debilitation, but you see it here in the ninth house, which is actually the signification house for Jupiter. And Jupiter gets stronger when it's positioned in the ninth house, as the ninth sign is Sagittarius. And so the Jupiter has an affinity for that ninth house. And so ninth house being the guru, our spiritual evolution, our spiritual education, and Jupiter kind of being the karaka or representing that energy as a planet in itself. So it's very comfortable in that position. Now, because it's debilitated, that doesn't mean for the Taurus Lagna, this is a perfect time to find a guru if you don't have one. Because you have this Rahu ascendant thing going over your chart as well. So you have to be skeptical. You have to be considerate of the possibilities that some of the gurus out there, they're false. For as many true Sat gurus out there, there's a million more false gurus. So we must keep this in consideration for the Taurus Lagna, not to stay focused and disciplined on their spiritual path, because that Jupiter is debilitated and it's hitting the ninth house. And if you already have a guru, and that guru is righteous, to stay in that devotion and education with that guru. But Rahu being there does kind of represent the temptation to go against the guru or to be away from the guru. So you also kind of see a duality for the Taurus Lagnesh, which is one side of them wants to experience the material beauty of life from that exalted Rahu ascendancy that's coming through on their chart. But then you have the spiritual focus, service to the guru, focus on our spiritual education, focus on our spiritual sadhana. So it's kind of like a push and a pull during this transit for the Taurus Lagna between the material world and wanting to focus more on the spiritual. But definitely with the Jupiter being debilitated and us wanting to improve our relationship with Jupiter during a time like that, we would want to have as good of a relationship with our guru as possible. So if there's an opportunity to see your guru, you see your guru. If there's an opportunity to read a book from your guru, read a new teaching or a speech, if they're living, or one of their older speeches or their teachings if they're past. This is all highly encouraged during this transit. And Rahu also in its ascendant position does kind of open up the possibility for the mystical instead of the material if we choose that. And Jupiter, even though it's debilitated, its position in the ninth house also being encouraging spiritually. So maybe though even people are successful in materially during this time, that it doesn't necessarily take away from their spiritual growth, but it can,
Right.
because when you have more money, that can lead to more ego, and that could lead to less devotion to our humility and our acceptance and our patience and our spiritual practices. And so Jupiter being debilitated sometimes shows that you may not be thinking about the guru. Uh,
Mm.
in the ninth house, but it certainly wants you to think about your guru's teachings and embody your guru's teachings and not be susceptible to the Maya, to the illusion of the material world. It doesn't mean if you have a money-making opportunity not to take it. The universe is also suggesting that, but understand that that is also all part of the Maya, that when we go through our moksha, when we go through our samadhi, there's no amount of money that we're going to take with us.
Right. They can, I mean, like, if they want to focus materially, they can focus materially, yet stay grounded and connected to the spiritual practices.
Yeah, exactly. And if they don't, they're vulnerable to being overly materialistic and potentially greedy.
Right.
But they can also be very humble if they choose that higher spiritual path.
Right.
You know, like they might gain a lot of money, but do humanitarian things with it.
Right. Right.
So, you know, I mean, you even hear of like, you know, gangsters, drug lords from South America. They used to give money out to the poor people of their country.
Right. Nice.
So very interesting transit for the Taurus Lagna. Should we take a look at Gemini?
Yes, please. Yeah, these slides are nice because it can give a nice transit.
Yeah, I wanted to bring these slides in so everyone could kind of see, oh, it's right there. You know, that
Yeah.
I'm a Gemini ascendant. I know that. And so Jupiter's sitting right there in my 8th house.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, as you can see, this looks like a difficult transit for the Gemini ascendant. The Gemini ascendant just had a very powerful transit while Rahu was kind of in one of its beneficial positions there in Gemini for the last long while before it entered Taurus. But this upcoming transit for Gemini, it can be very challenging. First thing, as far as the Jupiter debilitation goes, we see that Jupiter is falling into the 8th house. Now, from a spiritual perspective, that's great. That's wonderful because you have an intellectual person and now their wisdom is going to be more inclined towards the mystical, towards the occult, towards the esoteric. So you might have an individual who is very scientifically minded. Maybe they're an atheist. Maybe they don't really give much value or credit to things which are beyond scientific proof. But
Right.
this isn't actually an interesting transit for them in which their minds kind of open up to the possibilities of these things. So that's one of the really positive things that I really like about that Jupiter in the 8th house for the Gemini ascendant during this transit. But I went to school with in New Mexico at the Ayurvedic Institute with Dr. Vasant Lad for many years. And so we learned a lot of medical Jyotish together, and we understand the 8th house as a house of the last 3 stages of disease, Sthana, Samshray, Vyakti, and Beta. So this is when the doshas in the body are so high and they're circulating in the body so high that they actually start to enter an organ or a tissue in the body and make changes of the tissue. So we're talking about serious disease vulnerabilities here. And I want to be straightforward and honest with everyone out there. If you're a Gemini ascendant, I want you to get an Ayurvedic practitioner. I want you to get regular doctor's visits because there is a lot of health vulnerability at your chart during this time. Now, luckily, there's also a Viparita Yogi here because you have Saturn here, which is Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and then Saturn is positioned there. So you have a Viparita Yoga. So when that Jupiter-Saturn combination with that Viparita Yoga in the 8th house, it might at first glance look really dark, but it's not completely dark because that yoga gives you the ability to conquer disease.
Okay.
But the Jupiter is debilitated. So you can't conquer the disease without the knowledge of it, without the wisdom of it. And according to Dr. Lad and the teachings of Ayurveda, all disease, the solution to the disease comes from the root of the problem. Okay, so we get to the root of the problem, and that's also what the 8th house energy is getting to the root of the problem. So in other words, it's a time where, yes, people will overcome their health challenges, even though they might have them, but it also requires them to learn and educate themselves on not just the Western allopathic treatment of it, because that takes place not in the 8th house. This is alternative treatments. We must be open to Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, energy healing, all these alternative forms of plant medicine. We must be open-minded to these alternative forms of healing during this time. Going to be very beneficial for the Gemini Lagnesh, because also in the house of Vikriti, which is the 6th house, you have this 5-planet conjunction going on right now. And that's the first 3 stages of disease. So
Okay.
that's where the doshas get aggravated. So not only are the doshas vulnerable to be aggravated, but they're vulnerable to make changes to the tissue. So it's like in the 6th house, the person would be urinating frequently. But by the time the problem gets to affecting the 8th house, they have kidney or bladder a problem.
Right.
So this is kind of a transit where, okay, we might have some symptoms that are indicating that our body is not in complete balance with itself. And we have to educate ourselves, not just using prescription medications, about what we can do to bring our body into balance. And it's not just about Ayurvedic medicine, but it's also about pranayama, breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, exercise. Ayurveda is just the science of living. It's the science of how to live. So
Right.
again, part of this transit I see for the Gemini is learning how to live again for the longest, so that you can live the longest life possible. Because actually, when Saturn is in the 8th house, especially in its own sign, it indicates a very long life. But as Dr. Loud would always joke, a long life with arthritis.
Right. And Kṣaṇāti, sorry, and when you mentioned about this 3-stage in the medical, is it when planets are transiting in these houses? What if someone has natal planets sitting there? So they should also look into it in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the doshas of the planets. So, Jupiter's a very Kapha planet, but Saturn's a very Vata planet, but they're in the Earth sign of Capricorn. So there's a lot of like watery and earthy, more Kaphic elements here. Like one of the things that's happened, just for example, during the quarantine, for example, there's been an increase in weight gain. So there's been a lot more obesity.
Yes.
There's been an increase in drug abuse and drug addiction, alcohol abuse and alcohol addiction. That's also shown in the 8th house.
Right.
So I think the yoga, and I think it's kind of timely that it's kind of coming as we get into the time when coronavirus is starting to change. The perception of it is starting to change as vaccines are becoming available. I'm not making any political comment on that. I'm just saying that it's becoming available. And
Right.
I just want to say that this Jupiter Saturn combination in the eighth house shows that ultimately, yeah, we can go to a doctor for advice, and they can give us a medicine, but really the best thing we can do is go to someone like an Ayurvedic practitioner who will give us a lifestyle plan. And that
Right.
lifestyle plan is not only going to help you with the health problems that you're having now, but the health problems that you will have for the rest of your life.
Right. And there's also been, what I notice is a huge increase in like mental emotional health, anxieties and fears.
Sure. And that could be a lot to do with the sixth house in that, also in that Vikriti, first three stages of disease position. But some positive things about this transit, as Jupiter has rulership over the 10th house here and over the 7th house, possibilities in relationship and possibilities in career. But guess what? Health is wealth. And that's the ultimate lesson of this transit for the Gemini Lagna. You have health, then maybe you can have a partner and a job. But you cannot sacrifice your health for your partner or your job. And
Absolutely. Beautifully said.
that could definitely show up here for the Gemini. So I hope that was, I think that was in depth on Gemini, and we should move on to Cancer.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So as we take a look at the Cancer Lagnash, we see that it falls directly in the 7th house. So Cancer, Jupiter and Moon, there's a strong strong tale in the Vedas of the moon actually sleeping with Tara, which is Jupiter's wife, which gave birth to Mercury. And that's the short version of the story. But it has to do with this transit. This transit is perfectly applicable of that story, because it's not a functional benefic here. Even though Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, you're seeing that Saturn is definitely not a functional benefic to the Cancer. And it's so close with the Jupiter in the Saturn sign. There's so much Saturn energy affecting that Jupiter that it's really not how we traditionally experience Jupiter's energy. And so the Cancer Lagna, it's their natural orientation or their energy to be very caring and loving and giving towards their family and towards their loved ones. Now, Saturn and Jupiter in the 7th house, that's the house of marriage. Let's take a look at it from that perspective. Now, from a marriage perspective, if you're not married and you're a Cancer ascendant, and then the karaka of Jupiter marriage is with Saturn in its own sign affecting the 7th house, this is the possibility for you to get married. Not to mention that the house of children is being here activated with 5 different planets. So maybe you're having a child and then getting married, or maybe you're getting married and then immediately having a child. Oh, and by the way, today is my 1-year wedding anniversary. So
Oh, happy
I'm very
marriage
happy to share
anniversary to you and your wife.
that. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. It just made me think. And this is the opportunity again to find that partner. But we've been dealing with this coronavirus. We've been dealing with quarantine. We've been dealing with isolation. And if you're single, a lot of my single friends that I've talked to have experienced a lot of loneliness during this time. Not a lot of people are connecting, dating. There's not a lot of romance out there in the world because of the restrictions and everything. People don't feel comfortable or safe around each other. And we already don't when we're dating and we're single, you know? Um,
Right.
People aren't supposed to feel comfortable. So adding that second layer of uncomfortability is certainly not going to make things any easier. But this transit shows the kind of breaking of that. And it kind of shows that, okay, the Cancer ascendant, maybe before this period, because Rahu was in Gemini and things like that, they weren't as focused on the marriage if they were single, or they weren't really thinking about getting married if they were single. But they've been in their house stuck in their house single for the last year or over a year. So they're ready to not be single anymore. And I can tell you one thing for the Cancer Lagna, that they will be seeking romance, they will be seeking dating, and I believe energetically that the husband, the partner, is coming to them. But we have to take into effect the debilitation factor, even though Saturn is in its own sign. The debilitation factor being that Jupiter represents wisdom.
Right.
So it's not always bad when one partner is a little bit wiser than another. But for compatibility to exist within a relationship so that a marriage can actually last a whole lifetime, the consciousnesses have to be similar. The consciousness have to be close. And see, when you've been alone and in isolation, especially as a Cancer ascendant, you might get really excited at that first opportunity for
Right.
companionship, to not be alone.
Right.
But it kind of shows, okay, well, there's a lot of fish in the sea, as we like to say.
Yes.
And so the first person that you have feelings for after not dating for a long period of time might not be the person that you end up marrying. And that's just something to consider as part of the debilitation factor, is that, okay, you really got to work on that compatibility. Is this person's consciousness in alignment with mine? Because that's something that, even though I want a companion and I want a partner and I want a family, I also want a partner that I can be married to for the rest of my life, not one that's just going to be here for a short period of time. So we have to have a similar consciousness. And
Right.
for the Cancer Lagna, that also means that they're very giving. And so the person that they're giving to also has to be very appreciative of the giving nature of the Cancer. And also, because of Jupiter, they should be very giving themselves. So there should be a lot of reciprocated giving as far as compatibility. But it's a very romantic transit for the Cancer Lagna. Even though Jupiter's debilitated, it seems romantic to me.
Nice.
But what if you're already married? And that's another thing that's worth discussing. If you already are married, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be, if you're a Cancer ascendant, is going to say, okay, there are certain things in our relationship that are wonderful. There are certain things in our relationship that could use some work.
Mm.
And a, a lot of couples are afraid to admit, and there's not one couple out there that can't do some work to improve their relationship with each other. It's not like we're perfect human beings out here.
Yes.
Um, but it has this energy of, what can I do as far as Jupiter? What can I learn to be better for you, to do better for you, to be a better partner for you? Jupiter Karaka, to be a better husband, to be a better partner, you know? So there has to be this energy of wanting to grow, wanting to evolve together, you know? So even if the consciousness is like, when two people initially marry, most likely their consciousnesses are close. But let's
Yes.
say over time, their consciousnesses start to grow a little bit in different directions. Well, then this will be a good transit for the Cancer Lagna, because it will help bring their consciousness either close together or break them apart. Now,
Right.
ideally, it brings the consciousness together because we want to make the marriage work. And Jupiter and Saturn in its own sign, they want to make the marriage sustainable and they want to make it work. But only if the person is willing to grow, only if the person is willing to work, only if the person is willing to change. See, Saturn and Jupiter are both guru planets. So having them both here in the 7th house for the Cancer Lagna shows a lot of learning through the relationship. And so it could be a really beneficial period romantically if you're married, in terms of feeling like, let's say you've been married 20 years, you feel like the marriage is fresh again because you've both grown to understand each other better, and you're trying things that each other are recommending and things like that. But let's say that we keep our minds closed and we're not open to the suggestions of our partners, and we're not open to change. It could be a difficult transit for the Cancer Lugnish,
Okay.
because the chart is pushing the change, but the debilitation makes the person work harder for it, especially if it's a male husband.
Yeah.
So, um, so uh, it requires patience on the part of the spouse, as the partner grows slower than is expected by the spouse.
Mm.
So I still think that growth is guaranteed here, but it may be not as accelerated as the partner will have liked, which will also cause that person to mature because they're becoming more patient. So that improves the whole relationship. So I don't think it's a bad transit for a married Cancer Lagna, but it is a time to work on the relationship.
Right.
Um, and you also see the Cancer is in the 1st house here. So it's also about our identity. You know,
Okay.
how do we create our own identity uh, if we're single? As we try to get into a relationship, how do we maintain our identity? And if we're already in a marriage, how do we create our own independent identity, which is separate from our partners? But what's really interesting about the Saturn Jupiter is it's kind of beyond Maya. And beyond Maya, there is no ahankar. There is
Mm.
no ego. There is no identity. So I don't
Mm.
want to get too metaphysical here because I like to be scientific in my approach. But there's also the possibility here uh, for the two identities of people to become one,
Right.
like a soul bond.
Yes.
So that's beautiful, I think. And then they can have all these children together.
A lot of planets
They can have,
together.
then they can have 5 different children.
Yeah.
All this past lifetime karma in that 5th house,
Right.
exalted during this transit.
Hmm.
So it's like you're a Cancer Lugna. It's like so we have this karmic circle that we travel with, but our roles change every lifetime in that circle. So you're your uh, mother's daughter in this lifetime, Nav. But
Yes.
in your next lifetime, you might be your mother's mother.
Right.
So that's the kind of energy which is also kind of setting up here as far as the children that would enter the lives if they're birthed during for the Cancer Ascendant during this transit. It's definitely some past lifetime strong karmic connection there.
Right.
So was that thorough on Cancer? Should we discuss
Yes.
Leo?
Yes, please.
Okay, wonderful. I hope these graphs are helpful for everybody.
Yes, they're very I'm sure everybody's enjoying them because they can really see the planetary transits.
So for the Leo Lagna, you see this 410 split on the Rahu Ketu axis. So that's the Kundalini axis. So that's very intense for the Leo Lagna. So before we even discuss Jupiter, we discuss a huge Kundalini axis transit here. All of those planets in the fourth house is going to be activating an energy that's going to be promoting their career and having all sorts of crazy changes in their home life as a result. So this is one of the most transformative periods for the Leo Lagna before we even get into the debilitation. Now, again, just like we saw with Gemini, where there was the Viparita Yoga in the 8th house, well, now we find the Viparita Yoga in the 6th house, where Saturn and Capricorn is there, and so is Saturn. So this is the house of Vikriti,
Mm-hmm.
the first 3 stages of disease. So here we don't have to worry as much about serious or chronic illness or any kind of serious thing like that, but we do have to worry about how we feel, because the 6th house has to do, from a medical perspective, with the first 3 stages of disease: Sanchay, Prakop, and Prasara. And in these 3 stages of disease, the doshas accumulate because they get aggravated and they begin to circulate in the body. Whether it's Vata, Pitta, Kapha, it's aggravated and it's circulating in the body. So if Vata is aggravated, circulating in the body, the person is anxious. If Pitta is circulating in the body, the person is angry. If Kapha is circulating in the body, the person is lazy and tired and sleepy. So if all of these energies we have to be aware that they can be affecting us during this transit as the Leo Lagna, because so much energy of the Rahu exalted transit hitting their 10th house shows all sorts of opportunities in their career, but it's going to require all sorts of potentials and them maybe needing to move, change locations, possibly the home that they're living in, possibly the city that they're living in, state, or even country. So whenever we make dramatic moves like this, our diet changes, the climate changes, and the bacteria in the water is different. And so our body has to get accustomed to the new kind of climate or situation there. So even though for the Leo Lagna, I really like this transit as being beneficial, they also have to be concerned about their health. Not so much so as the Gemini Lagna does, but still to a certain extent. Now, another really important thing is the 6th house is a house of service. And Saturn is often a karaka, or an indicator for service. And Capricorn has to do with the kind of needy population, the poor. And so you have this vibration with Jupiter, which has its potential to be very humanitarian in this energy, because Rahu is exalted, which shows the Leo Lagna over this next 2 years for them, because of Rahu, could experience extreme financial surprise gain. But what do you do with that money? That is what is important. And the Jupiter-Saturn transit here in the 6th house is kind of suggesting, okay, I have to be able to provide for myself and provide for my family. That's definitely strong with the Saturn there. But Jupiter wants us to be more humanitarian. Mm-hmm. It wants us to actually use that money to create some benefit for those that are less blessed. Or as I say, are dealt a rough hand in the card game of life. So it's easier than saying they have bad karma. No one really has bad karma. They just have karma which we have to work through. It's the cycle of our lives. It's nothing of it is bad. It's just, it is so. So we look at this energy of Jupiter and Saturn in the 6th house, and that Jupiter is kind of pushing the person to be more kind of humanitarian or selfless or service oriented. Even though they're going to be growing materially during this time,
Right.
it kind of says, okay, well, I'm not going to let that inflate my ego. I'm not
Right.
going to let that inflate my ego. And luckily, at the same time, right now, there's a Sun K2 combination. So that's going to help with the humility. But soon, the Sun will go into Sagittarius and things will be different. And eventually, the Sun will join Jupiter and Saturn here in Capricorn. And that will be a very interesting transit as well. Be
Right.
a three-way transit. And so that kind of energy is kind of setting up when the Sun makes its way through the 5th house, through the 6th house, and it joins Jupiter and Saturn. You're also going to see some energies as far as, okay, there's a career that I want, there's a goal that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and I have my eye set on the prize. But no matter how hard I try, no matter how much work I do, I have to be patient to get there. I
Okay.
there's nothing I can do. There's not enough that I can do to get there except be patient enough to receive when the opportunity comes.
Right. Right.
So let's move on to Virgo, just so we finish with the first 6 signs here. So looking at Virgo here, we see a direct transit on the 5th house for the debilitated Jupiter. And this is very significant because Jupiter indicates a planet of education, and the 5th house is a house of education. And Saturn is very strong there. And see, Virgo ascendancies are naturally very intelligent people.
Right.
And so uh, this is a really good time for education. And because Jupiter is debilitated, it's not easy education. This is the more formal education. But what's interesting is that Rahu's exalted is hitting the 9th house. So it's kind of a battle during this time. Because I guess after everything that's happening, people have been thinking a lot deeper about things since
Yeah.
the quarantine and the virus and everything. And so on one side of it, you have someone who wants a very traditional kind of education here, like medical school, law school, business school, something like that. But the 9th house education, they want to become an astrologer, a Vastu professional, an Ayurvedic practitioner. So you kind of see a blend of those things. And so one thing that could be really beneficial, especially with all of those planets in Scorpio, is this idea of integrative medicine, which is like, okay, a blend of East and Western medicine, which I think is what Dr. Lotta said is what the future of medicine really is. But besides education, this is also the house of children. And so if you have children, this will be a time that they'll really be growing. And because of the debilitate Saturn being strong, they'll be growing strong in certain ways. And in other ways, they'll be growing in direction that their parents don't want them to grow in. In other words, it's every parent is different, but, and I'm not a parent yet, although I can't wait to be, but
Oh,
um, there is this energy of, well, I kind of want my child to be a certain way. I kind of want my child to be a certain kind of person. And for the Virgo Lagna, it's saying, okay, that's true. And I'm going to make you proud, mom and dad,
Right.
and it shows that, but it also shows there are some things about me that you're not going to understand. And
Right.
there's some interests that I have that you're not going to understand. Like, for example, someone who's really into astrology or reincarnation or the Vedas, and they're coming from a Western background, or even vice versa, someone coming from a Vedic background who's interested in allopathic and Western religious studies. It would be very ironic, but we're coming into that world where everything is blending together.
Right.
But as this is the house of children, this is a great potential for fertility, especially in terms of women's fertility. The challenge is a lot of times when people want to have children, they have to try many times.
Right.
And Jupiter being debilitated shows that you probably are going to have to try more than, like, it's probably not going to happen the first time.
Right. Right.
But Saturn being in its root position there, saying that one of these times it's going to happen. So keep trying. So kind of the energy that I want to suggest for the Virgo Lagna, if they are trying to have children, and they are feeling discouraged by the lack of success, know that by the end of this transit, I think that the woman will be pregnant.
Okay.
If you continue to try and use also, as much fertility, this is a house of spiritual techniques. So there's
Okay.
lots of ancient spiritual fertility techniques that could also be learned about and applied during this period to help increase with that energy.
Beautiful.
Um, so it's a good time for education. It's a good time for children, but it does require you to work a little bit harder for those things. Now, the person wouldn't have to work as hard if they were to choose something less formal, like Ayurveda or Jyotish. Not to say that those things are easy, but that maybe medical school or law school would be a little bit more difficult.
Okay.
But I like this transit as well. And so I just hope everyone out there, as we looked at these different charts, you think of a debilitated planet and it entering with another planet that it's not necessarily friends with, and this thing that happens once every 800 years or something like that is happening. And you think, oh, is it positive or negative? Well, I always try to take a look at the positive side of it. And then you also have to be honest with the negative vulnerabilities of it.
Right.
Because when a planet is debilitated, we are
Yes.
susceptible to those negative vulnerabilities. But that doesn't mean that we have to fall to them. And so I hope everyone has seen the opportunity they have to either fall victim to the vulnerabilities of the debilitation or really prosper as a result of this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. There's a lot of positive benefits too. So a lot of times we think in Jyotish as everything is fated.
Hmm.
But as we look at a lot of the different charts, whether it's a fixed sign, a movable sign, a changeable sign, there's lots of elements of free will to the karma that we create or the
Okay.
karma that we don't create. And hopefully we don't create any karma,
Right.
because the less karma we create, the better, unless it's positive karma. But I still think that ultimately the Satgurus teach us we don't want to create any karma at all, because
Right.
that's what's going to truly allow us to go to Mahasamadhi and rejoin with the Paramatman, which will be the ultimate ecstasy or bliss.
Right.
So until then, we'll keep learning these lessons that Jupiter and the other planets have to teach us. And we'll do a second part on Libra through Pisces to discuss how it will affect the other ascendancies as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Kṣaṇāti. And
Thank
we'll be
you.
back with our second part soon. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know how you like it. Leave us a comment. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Kṣaṇāti.
Namaste. Thank you, Navjeet. Blessings to the community. Om Namah Shivaya.